Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war live update, a geopolitical news update, last minute one, so you won't have got any notifications for this. Just thought Sunday night, just got to divulge these nuggets with you, otherwise it'll be all out of time and I'll get all flustered tomorrow as there'll be too much to talk about tomorrow. So if you fancy learning about what's going on in Ukraine and concerning Ukraine in the world, then here's your chance. And in fact, we're going to start with the breaking news of Donald Trump supposedly being up for or ready to or putting in preparations for sanctioning Russia. This is big news. Caveat, believe it when I see it. Always got to say that. Believe it when I see it with Donald Trump, because otherwise we do get our hopes up too high. He is one to throw around the rhetoric, to throw around the claims. But as we've seen from the 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 50 days, 10 to 12 days, 2 weeks, there, it's very easy for him not to follow through on his claims. So anyway, with that in mind, let's go to, I'm going to put my face over there on that screen. Let's go to the claims, and you should be able to hear this. Let me know if you can when I get it ready. Here we go.
Are you ready to move to the second phase? Are you ready to move to the second phase of sanctions against Russia or punishing Putin? How was your call with the Prime Minister?
Now, what's interesting about his response there, as other people have pointed out, is that it was unconsidered. Are you ready to move to the second phase of secondary sanctions? Are you ready to impose secondary sanctions? Second phase here. Yes, I am. Next question. Yes, I am. Okay, so that's interesting. This is, by the way, on his way to the men's US Open tennis final in New York. Somebody, Tim White here says, hope fans can sneak in some Ukraine flags. Well, it's interesting because this tennis final, there's been a bit of controversy. I'll throw this in as well. Basically, the US Open orders broadcasters to censor reactions to Trump. So an email obtained by Bounces, so a tennis news service, I believe, includes instructions from the US Open on supporting Trump's planned stagecraft during the national anthem. This is also reported in The Guardian. Broadcasters told not to air any booing of Donald Trump at US Open men's final. I mean, this is basically, is it censorship? It looks like it. Or is it the US Open just wanting their thing to sound really positive and good and not to be hijacked by political sentiments? But still, it does look rather like censorship. So Trump will appear on a big screen during the national anthem. Broadcasters asked not to show any disruptions. The message adds, we ask all broadcasters to refrain from showing any disruptions or reactions in response to the president's attendance in any capacity. So there you go. It's all going to go down really, really well. Right. That aside, let us go back to this idea of sanctioning Russia, because this is huge news if it's true. And actually, you're hearing this from a number of different sources. So if we just heard it from Trump, you'd be like, Trump's just sounding off. But we got Scott Bessant saying we are prepared to increase pressure on Russia. The US is prepared to work with European allies on new sanctions targeting countries that buy Russian oil. Okay, so that's Scott Bessant, the Treasury Secretary. Then we're hearing Kevin Hassett, who's often wheeled out at similar occasions, saying that the US will discuss possible new sanctions against Russia in the coming days. He noted that his department is responsible for applying sanctions against countries like India for economic assistance to Russia. So this is really good news to hear this from three different sources. Now, there's a lot of wriggle room here to discuss possible new sanctions against Russia in the coming days. But we are, I think, under the impression that Europe is sending out, or the EU is sending out, a contingent. It might be Europe as a whole, it might include sort of the UK and Norway as well. So Europe or the EU is sending out a contingent on behalf of the Coalition for the Willing to negotiate sanctions with the US against Russia. So it's looking better than it was at least some days ago. The problem is Donald Trump is all over the shop on this subject. And, you know, when we go back to that short set of questions on the way to the US Open, the good thing was he was very unconsidered. He answered that automatically, which gives you the impression that, yep, that's done. We've discussed that. Like, there's no kind of like, yeah, we are thinking that maybe we could do, you know, it was definite. Yes, I am. That's excellent, good news. I always say concentrate on the little things. So the way he answered that is really good. But then he moves on to the next. Yes, I am. Right, I want to talk about something else. So there's definitely, for me, like psychologically, if you were to psychoanalyze Trump here, as I like to do from my armchair psychologist, haughty ivory tower position, I would say that he's uncomfortable with that decision.
Are you ready to move to the second phase? Are you ready to move to the second phase of sanctions against Russia or punishing Putin? How was your call with the Prime Minister? How was your?
Yep, I am. Right. Really, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to linger on it. I'm going to move on. So on the one hand, good news. It's automatic. That's what he wants. And we've got Scott Bessant saying similar and Kevin Hassett saying similar. On the other hand, he clearly doesn't really want to linger on those, on that idea, on the idea of putting further pressure on Russia. Right. So that's all I've got to say on that at the moment. I'm sure more will emerge, but that's certainly good news to start with. But, you know, believe it when I see it type thing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to, when was this, 2008, for a bit of Viktor Orban. Now, this isn't news per se, but it's a great juxtaposition to his current position, which is doing whatever Russia wants and being fine with them invading Ukraine. Because Viktor Orban here in 2008 was bashing Russia. Of course, he started his political career in quite a different position. He might have been a little more sort of to the left. He's now become a sort of right-wing authoritarian ruler. And he has got on board more and more with supporting Russia. And nothing shows this more than what he said in 2008. After Russia attacked Georgia, he said, quote, "The peoples of Central Europe have a duty to speak out when an independent country is under military aggression." A year later, he met Putin one-on-one for the first time, and everything changed. The rest is history. So, I mean, I could play you the whole minute 42 here of him essentially having a go at, well, let's just play this beginning part. I won't go on too far. I'll just read out the subtitles. "The peoples of Central Europe have a duty to speak out clearly and unequivocally," said Orban back in 2008, "when an independent country is under military aggression. I think that we Hungarians are particularly burdened by this duty because of 1956. So, of course, he's going back into Hungarian history, rightfully so, to draw parallels between what happened in Hungary and what happened here in the case of Georgia. But so he says, therefore, when an independent state is attacked by the Russians with military aggression, we should speak out clearly, directly, and with the right moral grounding. And he gets a nice applause. And I can honestly say that I am somewhat depressed, he says, by what I see and hear in the public today in Hungary. So obviously back then there was still some pro-Russian sentiment, obviously, as you would expect, given Hungary's past in the general public. But he was very pro kind of supporting Georgia and anti-Russia. And then a year later, he meets Vladimir Putin, and the rest, as I say, is history. So there may be compromat, there may be some sweeteners, whatever it is that Putin has over Orban. It was pulled into action subsequently, and he was then not so anti-Russian. And indeed, since then, there have been huge connections drawn between Orban and Russia. There's all sorts of corruption that Orban's been involved in. There's a lot of money changing hands, and isn't that often the case? So we have a different Orban then than we do now. Okay, now we're going to go on to the relationship with Slovakia. And No, I think that was after he got into power. Was this before he got into power? Was it in order to get into power? Good question. I was presuming it was after he got into power, but I'm not 100% sure actually. So that is a really salient question. And hello to everyone out there listening to this. Thank you for hanging out together. So we have Anton Gerashenko then giving us a bit of a rundown of what took place between, well, starting our rundown because we've got quite a few sources talking about this meeting between Zelenskyy and Robert Fico, the leader of Slovakia, when he was on the way back from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization parade. He went and saw the military parade there, then came back, I think, via somewhere else to Uzhhorod, met with Zelenskyy in Uzhhorod, and then quite a bit was said that I think is pertinent. So Zelenskyy, during his meeting with Fico today, Ukraine responds to Russian strikes on our energy facilities and will continue to respond. But we really want this war to end. However, no one is going to just sit in the dark and take it. And of course, this will be with reference to the strikes on the Druzhba pipeline and infrastructure that both takes oil from Belarus and sends it to refineries in Russia, and to therefore, go elsewhere, including taking hydrocarbons down from Russia through Ukraine and into Slovakia and Hungary. And the pipeline, the infrastructure has been hit both in that section going from Belarus to Russia and a section going from Russia, well, actually through Ukraine. So the Ukrainians have hit that in Russia, and Slovakia have been super, super annoyed, as well as Hungary. We've heard a lot from Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó. So there's been quite a lot of talk about this from Slovakia and from Szijjártó as well. Slovakia is ready to help Ukraine with its experience of joining the EU. So one of the things that came out of this meeting between Fico and Zelenskyy is that Slovakia have formally said, we're okay with you joining the EU. Now, actually, that's no change, because as far as I'm aware, it's Hungary that's been more of the obstacle for Ukraine's accession there. I think Slovakia have broadly been more on side, but I might be wrong on that. Slovakian Prime Minister Fico responds to Trump's remarks on Russian oil. So this is where Trump said, hey, Europe needs to stop buying Russian oil. And really, that is dominantly Slovakia and Hungary, but of course he doesn't want to publicly come out and slag them off because he's very friendly with, particularly Hungary. But anyway, Fico responded to Trump's remarks on Russian oil and gas, stressing Europe needs a system to deliver energy reliably and at fair prices. Zelenskyy also says Ukraine is ready to supply oil and gas to Slovakia as long as it's not Russian, because, quote, we are at war, period. So interesting whether there is still enough oil and gas from Ukrainian reserves to be able to do that, or whether they can get it from elsewhere and help out with transportation. But though Fico sounds reasonable in saying, well, Europe needs a system to deliver energy reliably and at fair prices, actually Slovakia needs a system. Like, it's very easy to always think Europe should be doing everything. By that I mean the EU. But actually, other EU nations have unilaterally weaned, with pressure from the EU, weaned themselves off Russian hydrocarbons. Now, if they've done it successfully on the behest of the EU, but also just doing it themselves, then Slovakia and Hungary need to be able to do that. So to blame the EU, to blame kind of Europe more kind of generically, I think is pretty weak. We have Fico telling Zelenskyy that while Slovakia cannot play a decisive role in Ukraine's security guarantees, it supports all initiatives that lead to a ceasefire and peace. He recalled backing Zelenskyy's peace formula and noted that Ukraine's path to the EU will be challenging, offering Slovakia's experience. So not going to stand in the way of security guarantees or accession to the EU. They're not going to send troops to Ukraine. They've already announced that. Now, Fico said Bratislava, so the capital of Slovakia, and Kiev have diametrically opposed views on energy. I said that I respect the point of view of the president, but I expect you to respect our points of view as well, he said. In other words, I kind of understand that you're going to want to blow up the Russian pipelines, the Druzhba pipelines, but that's not our point of view, obviously, because we're Slovakia and we want to keep consuming those hydrocarbons. So it's a bit of an impasse, really. I want to thank. This is nice of Fico to say this, or this is a good sign. essentially, I want to thank you, the Ukrainian government and administration, for the way that you care for the Slovak community, the Slovak national minority, and for respecting all rights that meet international standards. Now, this is a differentiation between Slovakia and Hungary. Hungary often, or Peter Shahata and Orban often complain about the rights of the Transcarpathian Hungarian diaspora communities that live in the border area between Hungary and Ukraine, and they often say, look, we're not doing this, and they use that as leverage. They say, look, we want you to assure us formally that they're going to have language rights and this and that, whatever it is. I think it's an excuse, and I think they're using leverage like that as an excuse not to do whatever it is they're arguing over personally. But Slovakia, they're being much more generous to Ukraine in that regard. So Europe's Coalition of the Willing summit on September the 4th, a few days back now, struggled to gain Washington's support for a proposed plan to end Russia's war in Ukraine, and doubts remain over whether or not it can be implemented. That's the security guarantees. European and Ukrainian officials have told the Kyiv Independent. So there's quite a bit going on with security guarantees. A few, I think, pretty interesting nuggets here. The first one, Sky Shield. So this is stopping, I guess, closing the airspace over Ukraine. Olivier Faure, the leader of the Socialist Party, this is in France, has declared his support for the French armed forces' involvement in Ukraine following the signing of a peace treaty. This is super important because there is a worry that some on the French left aren't quite so favorable towards Ukraine, rather like the French far right with Rassemblement National. The far right and the far left, very much like many places, are less less willing to be openly supportive of Ukraine. And the importance in France is that the left has a lot more power in France than in most other places in Europe. You know, the socialists in France they've got a rich history. These kind of you've got the France Insoumise and Mélenchon and these other leaders. You know, the French left is traditionally fairly hefty in a more significant way. It's quite a unionized country. You know, workers like to go on strike in France. So whereas I'm always whinging about the right wing in Europe, it's generally because the right wing has much more prevalence in Europe, and the left wing either isn't so openly against Ukraine or isn't in power particularly, doesn't have that much heft. France is slightly different. And we have heard from Mélenchon that he's not so positive about Ukraine, but it's good to hear the Socialist Party leader here being positive. He also opened on the protection of Ukrainian skies to safeguard civilians in times of war. So that's good news. That's what we want. We want bipartisan support for Ukraine or multi-party support of Ukraine in every country. That'd be nice. Now, talking about the Coalition of the Willing. I'd normally leave this for the military aid video, but I think it's pertinent here. So Deep State are saying that here are the positions of, so Deep State maps and they do other sort of reporting and whatnot. Here are the positions of some European countries on participation in security guarantees for Ukraine. And it's a bit all over the place. And it also changes. So this isn't like set in stone. So Poland will not send troops, but will focus on logistical support. Romania will participate in peacekeeping missions only after a ceasefire is concluded, using its bases for logistics. That last point is important. Italy will also not send its troops to Ukraine. The country is ready to support through monitoring and training initiatives. Germany will focus on financing, arming and training the AFU. The decision to send peacekeepers will be made in due time after determining the framework conditions. We've heard various things on Germany, and that one's kind of more like in limbo rather than yes or no. Croatia does not plan to send troops to Ukraine. It will continue to provide political, financial, and military technical support. Robert Fico from Slovakia said there's no talk of sending Slovak military personnel to Ukraine. Instead, the country is ready to provide logistical support. So, yeah, it basically getting left, I think, predominantly to France and the UK, but I think also Nordic states and Baltic states might play a role as well. Although the closer you get to Russia, it seems that actually the more reluctant some of the nations are to supply troops, maybe because they want to keep them back in their own countries just in case Russia takes a second bite, or maybe it's just too controversial to have the very close neighbors helping out. But anyway, that's a bit of a summary of some of the positions. I think Canada's also said that they would provide troops, as well as Australia. So there's a few other countries that might need to be included there. Now, talking about Canada, Mark Carney, their Prime Minister, said Putin will not dictate the terms of Ukrainian peace. This is one of the issues that I have, is that Putin keeps coming out and saying, no, foreign troops in Ukraine are legitimate targets, and we need to have a veto in security guarantees. No, that doesn't happen, mate. You don't get to dictate to allies of Ukraine what allies of Ukraine do to support Ukraine. In the same way that, we were unable to dictate to you whether you invaded or not. You invaded yourselves unilaterally. You decided that yourself. It was illegal, and we are reacting to that. You aren't going to dictate these matters. So the problem is, then Trump has come along, or the Americans have come along, and the Trump administration said, actually, the Russians do need to have a say in security guarantees. Whoa! So it doesn't help that there is a incoherence amongst some allies, the US in particular, but ostensibly, no, Putin should not be able to dictate the terms of security guarantees. Right, Finnish people out there, my friendly Finns in the live chat, if some of you are indeed there. I don't know if you are, haven't looked yet. A Finnish guy is there, and I presume that you are indeed Finnish. I know you are. So what's going on here? Large illegal weapons and explosive caches have been discovered in the Finnish towns of Voikala and Karjala, located approximately 80 kilometers from the Russian border. In Karjala, law enforcement officers found over 100 firearms, over 100,000 rounds of ammunition, fragmentation grenades, anti-tank ammunition, and 75mm cannon. What the frickety dick? That's mad. What's going on there? Some saying same in Poland not so long ago. Are these, from World War II? Left over? Is this arming against a Russian invasion from a kind of partisan point of view? Are these people who are supportive of Russia getting ready to do crazy things? So I'd like to know what's going on there. Right, okay, we're going to move sideways. We're going to move rather eastwards or westwards, depending on which way around the world you want to go. China has been drilling for oil and gas inside Taiwan's exclusive economic zone, with at least 12 vessels and drilling structures detected since July, some as close as 50 kilometers from Taiwan's Pratas Islands. This is very clever from the Chinese, very bad. This is, I do not like this one iota. But if you are a Chinese dictator wanting to just be expansionist, Taiwan doesn't want to go to war with China, right? The PLA boats and the Chinese fishing militia and the Chinese coast guards are forever hassling Taiwanese and Filipino vessels, and they get away with it. And for China, they're just going to keep pushing the envelope and pushing the envelope. They're going to start drilling for oil and gas inside Taiwan's territories, essentially. That is outrageous. But if the UN doesn't do anything about this, the international community just lets them get away with this, then that would be pretty crazy. So this is according to The Guardian. China drilling for oil and gas inside Taiwan's exclusive economic zone. It is very clever to just keep pushing the envelope because, I guess they're pretty confident that no one is going to do anything about it. And before you know it, you have functional control over Taiwan's territories. You don't even need to invade. You just plant an oil rig there and help yourself to their natural resources. Absolutely outrageous. But if no one has the guts to do anything about it, then, China are just merely showing the impotency of a united foreign response. Now, talking about China and Russia, so Sino-Russian Energy Cooperation and its implications for the EU. Here are some key facts and a bit of a thread from Anton Gerashenko, so I thought I'd share that with you. Russia and China have agreed on a memorandum regarding the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, 50 billion cubic meters annually from the Russian Arctic via Mongolia. So this is a big pipeline that China initially said no to earlier on during the Ukraine war, because I presume China was just trying to hedge its bets and not annoy the West too much. And now, with the present global situation and Trump being as belligerent as he is, certainly in terms of trade with many other nations, China are probably like, yeah, whatever, yeah, we'll go for it. We'll have some of your gas through Mongolia. Thank you very much. Contract parameters, price, take or pay, financing timing remain undefined, but the very existence of the memorandum carries geopolitical significance, says Gerashenko. China is strengthening its position as a swing player in the global gas market, while Russia is further tying its exports to Beijing. So potential implications now for the EU. Market and economic implications: reduced Chinese LNG demand by the 2030s by up to 35 million tons per year, global LNG oversupply, prolonged low prices, potentially derailing new export projects in the US and Qatar, increased competition for the European LNG market, suppliers unable to enter China will attempt to secure market share in the EU, European companies planning long-term LNG contracts face growing price uncertainty, and the geopolitical implications: Russia has fewer incentives to return to the European market, focusing instead on the East, complicating any prospects of normalization. So, in other words, that if Russia are able to successfully pivot to China, then one, there's less leverage that the Europeans have over Russia, and there's less chance of normalizing the relationship anyway going forward, because Russia would be like, don't really need you anymore. So who cares whether you think we're okay or not? So China is consolidating control over global energy flows, gaining leverage not only over Russia, but also over Western exporters. The US might tighten sanctions against Russian projects, e.g. Arctic LNG 2, but the response remains unclear. And 3, the strategic risk for the EU. Dependence on LNG oversupply may appear beneficial because you get low prices, but increases Europe's vulnerability to global fluctuations. Financial instability of the LNG market, the potential freezing of new projects could mean that after 2035, the EU faces a shortage of alternatives, and China's energy policy has Beijing becoming a key arbiter of the market, and any changes in its demand will directly affect European security. So China gets to have its own kind of gas market leverage. Recommendations for the EU, says Gerashenko: 1, they need to diversify the LNG portfolio, deepen cooperation with reliable suppliers, being the US, Qatar, Norway, and Algeria. Avoid excessive long-term contracts that may become financially unviable if prices fall. And investment in infrastructure storage, expand LNG terminals and storage facilities to capitalize on the incoming period of low prices. Develop joint purchasing and reserve mechanisms at the EU level. And then a green transition as a strategic response. And I find this, ever more pertinent. I think pivoting towards renewables is such an important thing, and you don't have to see it as an environmental decision. It's literally energy diversification and energy security, so you're not dependent on others. You can just produce this stuff yourself with wind and solar and wave and hydro and whatever other renewables you can manage. And they are becoming cheaper and cheaper. And in fact, they are now price competitive. So use a window of cheaper energy to accelerate investments in renewables and hydrogen, reduce the risk of a new gas trap in the 2030s and 40s. So something like, for example, electric cars, putting mandates on electric vehicles means that you can move away from reliance on foreign fuels, petrol, and as long as your national energy production there's security with that, then that's great. So Norway, for example, even as a cold country where batteries don't operate as effectively, in the last year, was it 97% of the cars they sold or that were bought were electric vehicles? It's absolutely phenomenal. I see more and more electric vehicles on the roads in the UK. I was speaking to my American friend who was visiting last night, and he was saying, you are seeing more on the roads in the US, but of course, they've just stripped out EV mandates. They're now they're ripping out charge points in government facilities that they'd put in, not because it's going to cost them money to do that. They're just doing it to spite renewables, right, and EVs. They're just ripping out charge points. That those places they charge. It doesn't cost the government money to have those charge points because you pay to charge them. That charge point is at the government facility, but they're just ripping them out. But I just think that all countries are wise in adopting renewables for strategic reasons. And of course, the environment. Geopolitical coordination, actively participate in transatlantic consultations on sanctions against Russian projects like the Arctic LNG 2, coordinate positions with global South countries, which are becoming key arenas for Russian and Chinese influence. And this is all part of the global chess game that's going on, where China is ever more at the center. Right, now talking about sort of China, Russia, where we've got
doesn't yet want to open their market,
where we've got Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and lots of other nations thrown in as well now. This is Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, saying his piece.
India doesn't yet want to open their market.
India.
Stop buying Russian oil, right? And stop being a part of BRICS, right? They're the vowel between Russia and China. If that's who you want to be, go be it. But either support the dollar, support the United States of America, support your biggest client, who is the American consumer, or I guess you're going to pay a 50% tariff, and let's see how long this lasts. India does.
So, yeah, he's stop being part of BRICS. Shashank Joshi, the defense correspondent for The Economist, says, Lutnick is a human hand grenade thrown into 30 years of American diplomacy. Does the administration understand how much damage he is doing single-handedly? Who knows? But yeah, Howard Lutnick. Okay, so now we have Trump being asked, who do you blame for losing India to China? So this is something I've talked about recently, whereby he the other day put a Truth Social out that said, good luck conspiring with, good luck to Russia conspiring with India and China together against the United States, and then another one thereafter in a similar vein, just saying, well, screw you guys, I'm going home type thing. You guys have fun with each other. And that is this idea that India's been pushed towards China and been pushed towards Russia, and likewise with all three of those. Although I know people like Michael Vuchar on my live, not so convinced that that's a bad thing, as in not such a bad thing that India is being targeted by the US, because some people see India as quite a threat, with a nationalist, almost theocratic regime, almost, or at least government under Modi, Narendra Modi, who some will see him as a problem, and it's not an issue putting big sanctions, big tariffs on India because X, Y, and Z. So it depends what your views are on India, but I just think it's very dangerous to push all of these three further and closer together.
Pete doesn't want any part of that question. Yes, please.
Mr. President, who do you blame for losing India to China? In your post earlier today in the morning, you did put that out.
I don't think we have. I've been very disappointed that India would be buying so much oil, as you know, from Russia. And I let them know that. We put a very big tariff on India, 50% tariff, very high tariff. I get along very well with Modi, as you know. He's great. He was here a couple of months ago. In fact, we went to the Rose Garden, and the grass was so soaking wet. It was so...
Right. And so you've got the geopolitics, right? As far as Trump's really ready to take here. And then this is where you just get a sense that Trump's just mental. He's just nuts.
It was so soaking wet.
I'm just going to go back a bit.
We went to the Rose Garden, and the grass was so soaking wet. It was such a terrible place to have a news conference. I said, well, let's use a beautiful white stone emblematic of the White House, okay? And it's been very well received. But we had a news conference on the grass. It was my last news conference I had on the grass, because everybody sunk in. You probably sunk in. Every reporter out there, they ruined their shoes. We made that change. It's been a really well-received change. Yeah, please go ahead.
Just an excuse to say how wonderful he is for building stuff and paving over things with white stone, and I don't know. So we now hear that Modi will skip the UN General Assembly session in New York amid strained relations with the US. Instead, Foreign Minister Subramanyam Jaishankar will address the assembly. The decision comes as ties with Washington sharply deteriorate, says Nexter. Trump has imposed 50% tariffs on Indian goods, as we know, while New Delhi has lashed out at the US for what it calls economic diktat. Skipping the visit is seen as a symbolic move, signaling that India has no intention of showcasing allied loyalty. So this is, again, this idea that the US has pushed India away after many years of trying to get India into its orbit. I just want to highlight this. So Tim Pool, who, if you remember, Tim Pool is a right-wing influencer who's been given on occasion a seat at the press corps in the White House by Caroline Levitt, which is insanely irresponsible because he took money from Tenet Media, money that came from Russia through the Canadians and through this Tenet Media entity into like the American political discourse online with people like Benny Johnson and Tim Pool. So Tim Pool was taking crazy amounts of money a month from the Russians to spread anti-Ukraine propaganda, and it was horrific, right? So you would think, like, if you were just any kind of normal American, by that I mean Democrat or Republican, either party from the last 50 years, right? Not MAGA Republican nut jobs. If you were just any sensible political person for the last 50 years, you'd be like, we're keeping Tim Pool away from anyway. In fact, we might investigate him. In fact, we might, I don't know, indict him for some kind of irresponsible behavior, or at least rap him on the knuckles for taking Russian money and spreading propaganda, right? Pro-Russian propaganda. But that didn't happen. And now he's been promoted. He's literally been congratulated for that activity to be able to report from within the White House. It's insane. Anyway, he came out recently and said high-profile accounts that get paid to post political propaganda. And I think he's probably referring to this chorus. I don't know, you probably don't know this, but there's been but Brian Tyler Cohen and others have got together, and he's often complained about this, saying the right do this really well and the left don't do this. We need to properly fund online influencers, because the election was lost with Joe Rogan and these online influencers that were then really taken on board by the GOP. The GOP did a really good job and have done for like probably 10 years now of embracing. So here's an example. Charlie Kirk was a kind of nobody right-wing influencer, and now he's, you know, in charge of Turning Point USA, and he's on mainstream media all the time, and he's now a prolific figure because he was embraced by the GOP. So rather than saying, well, we are the mainstream party and you guys are fringe people doing stuff on the internet, and I don't understand the internets and the YouTubes, I don't get this, right? The GOP went, awesome, you guys are going to get us elected. And they took them in, and there's funding available for them, and, you know, money will be changing hands. But it's like adopting these people, and then Fox News would feature these people on their TV, on their news. Now you're only just starting to see this from the other side of the coin. Like CNN now is starting to show people like Anna Kasparian on with Abby Phillip and people like that. You know, there's this idea that the left's now starting to try and catch up. I'm not saying CNN's the left, but these people are getting on there, you know, because you've got Scott Jennings, you've got, you know, from CNN's point of view, they just want a bunch of these people. But you have people like Brian Tyler Cohen and David Pakman and whatnot, so getting together and say, right, we've got some funding and we're going to give it to these different influencers. But the thing is, you have to run by us. If you're going to take this money, if you looked at the contract for this, it's quite strict. If you take this money, then you need to pass by us who you're going to interview, or like kind of what you're going to say type thing. And that was seen as quite controversial, because then a lot of these who were otherwise independent creators are now not so independent. But anyway, I think that was people getting angry about that. I think that was missing the point. The point is that the left needs to be able to compete with the right in terms of having a unity within the information spaces so that mainstream media and influencers are cooperating, and that you do have funding for these like influencers and channels and whatnot. Tim Pool then comes out and says, having taken money from Russia, right, comes out and says high-profile accounts that get paid to post political propaganda without disclosing should be insta-banned. I have never seen such outrageous hypocrisy as it. Like, you just can't make that up. As Andrew Perpetua says, the gentleman who once pocketed Kremlin coin to promote their narrative now insists that those paid to post should be banned. Reminds me of the Spartans. When urged to bring change to his land, he simply replied, "Your family first." Just, it's absolutely insane. But anyway, that's happened. Right, we're now going to go on to a little bit of American stuff, just to sort of move us towards a conclusion. Europe. So this came out from Trump some time back now. Europe today hit another, a few days back. But I've been talking to you about the importance of, and goodness me, like this is like super important, right? So when Nigel Farage came over to the House Judiciary Committee from the UK for Reform UK, it's supposed to be in the first day of the Parliament opening in PMQ's Prime Minister Questions in the UK House of Commons. He was absent, and he went to the US to do a talking gig at Conservative conference. He was actually too late and couldn't do that. Did the House Judiciary Committee, where he had a hard time from Jamie Raskin, but was able to platform some of his claims. And then he was opening a show for GB News in the US, right? And that's why he's wearing that GB News GBN pin. So he was platforming his opinions on freedom of speech. But smuggled into what he said, if you remember, I reported this the other day, he said this is going to be a problem, like the way that UK is going about free speech laws and digital services taxes and digital services regulation and whatever, and the EU too. He says this is going to be bad for tech bosses, right? And that phrase that he threw in the middle of his spiel told you exactly what he was doing in the United States. So he was lobbying on behalf of the tech companies. Then you had this meal the other night where Trump had all those, or I don't know if there's a meal, a meeting with all the tech bosses. And then Mark Zuckerberg came out and said, Trump asked him, first of all the tech bosses had to just go around just like that cabinet meeting. And they all had to say lovely things to Trump. And it was absolutely bile-inducing, right? Vomit-inducing to hear, people like Bill Gates through gritted teeth have to say wonderful things about Trump, and then Tim Cook, and then Trump asked Mark Zuckerberg, who owns Meta, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, all that, what are you going to give the government? What are you going to give the United States type thing? And Mark Zuckerberg went, well, I was, how much money? Okay, so probably, I don't know. I hadn't really thought about this, but I'm thinking something like $600 billion through to 2028. Does that sound about right? And then Trump's like, oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So we've heard this from Tim Cook, who said $600 billion in the White House when he gave the gold to Trump, and all these other corporations saying how much you're going to invest in the US so that they get. So for Tim Cook, for Apple, he got tariff exemptions by giving Trump some gold and pledging a bunch of investment. But we've heard this from the EU, and we've heard this from South Korea and Japan. All these countries and entities have said, we are going to invest in the US all this money. And then Trump goes and says, look, we're getting $17 trillion of investment, when none of it is legally binding. And everyone's just palming Trump off with just nonsense. Now, why this is super important, like you might say, well, that's not nonsense. The EU are going to do that, and Japan are going to do that. It's like, okay, well, find me the contract where it says that. And it turns out that when you look at the trade deals, it's not mentioned at all, right? So there's no binding commitments there. But there was a hot mic incident at the meeting the other night, which I showed you the other day. Sorry, I didn't have this prepped, but I could probably find it if I could be bothered in an instant. But Mark Zuckerberg then, after he said, I'm going to pledge $600 billion to investments into the US, then turns to Trump and was caught on a hot mic saying, I didn't know you were going to ask me that, so I didn't know what number to give you, so I just said that one. Is that all right? In other words, I had no intention of doing that. He pulled that number out of his backside because Trump suddenly asked him. And Trump gets to then go and champion Meta for pledging $600 billion of investment. And then he gets to add that to the 17 trillion that all these other countries are supposedly promised. But it's entirely performative. So Mark Zuckerberg was caught on hot mic admitting it was performative. But anyway, I digress. So what you've got is Trump, wanting all this investment from these tech companies, but actually also what he is doing himself is lobbying on behalf of tech companies. So we have heard that the EU has been threatened by Trump and EU members, not just member states, but actual members, that if they release the digital services regulation, I forget the exact phrase, and we had this with Canada. It was on the table, and Mark Carney took it off the table when the Americans came and started doing their trade negotiations with Canada. In the end, they're still being tariffed anyway. But it's absolutely at the center of the American administration, the Trump administration's politics, is to make sure that all tech giants get anything they want and they don't get regulation. So they've taken that to the EU, they've taken that to the British government as well. It's on the table when it comes to negotiations, because people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and David Sachs and Mark Andreessen, all these South African oligarchs, and then you've got Curtis Yarvin as well and his agenda. These tech authoritarians, they want the power, and they're at the center of the government. Palantir is this scary entity that's run by Peter Thiel. He's at the center of everything. Peter Thiel proteges keep getting put in places. So the person that's now in charge of the Bureau of Labor Statistics is a Peter Thiel protege that's worked for Peter Thiel for the last however long. JD Vance is the freaking vice president of the United States, is a Peter Thiel protege who was financed through it, and then he gave him a job in his hedge fund, and then financed him to become senator of Ohio. And then he and his lackeys were the people who convinced Trump to take him on as the VP pick. Trump would never have taken on JD Vance. So this is all part of the kind of tech bros being at the center, and these tech companies being at the center of the Trump administration, and then using the Trump administration to dictate to all these other people that there should be no regulation against their corporations. And nothing says that more than what Trump just said on Truth Social. So all of that is the preamble to this. Europe today hit another great American company, Google, with a $3.5 billion fine, effectively taking money that would otherwise go to American investments and jobs. This is on top of the many fines and taxes that have been issued against Google and other American tech companies in particular. Very unfair, and the American taxpayer will not stand for it. Of course, what he's not understanding is the money is being extracted from EU citizens. So he's talking about this is money that this American corporation deserves. It's like, well, that money has come from the EU. And actually, if you're not abiding to EU regulation, then you can't have all that money. Thank you very much. You do business here if you adhere to our rules. It's the same in the US, right? But he doesn't like this because he is basically a lobbyer on behalf of tech companies. So he says, very unfair, and the American taxpayer will not stand for it. As I have said before, my administration will not allow these discriminatory actions to stand. Apple, as an example, was forced to pay $17 billion in a fine that, in my opinion, should not have been charged. They should get their money back. We cannot let this happen to brilliant and unprecedented American ingenuity. And if it does, I'll be forced to start a Section 301 proceeding to nullify the unfair penalties being charged to these taxpaying American companies. Thank you for your attention to this matter, Donald J. Trump. Now, this is, if nothing sums up the relationship between the US and Europe now and going forward for the next 3 years, this is it. Understand that what Nigel Farage was doing in the US was this. Understand what Peter Thiel is doing and Elon Musk is doing involved in the US government is this. Understand that what JD Vance is doing is this. And when JD Vance came to Europe at the Munich Security Conference and said that the biggest enemy is not Russia, but it's European freedom of speech, it's this. Everything that the US is doing at the moment concerning Europe in general has something to do with this. Honestly, like, I can't tell you how freaking important this is. This will define the next 3 years in so very many ways. But there you go. I hope you agree with that. Right. So now let's go to a bit of more kind of regular international politics, the G20 summit. So the 20 sort of big economies of the world. Trump has announced that the G20 summit in 2026 will be held in the US for the first time in 20 years in Miami. I wonder where it's going to be held. So it'll be held at Doral. Oh, what's that? It's it's a club that Trump owns. Right. Okay. So all the people there are going to be using Trump's own business to do something governmental, right? So this is an infraction of the emoluments clause as far as I'm concerned. The problem is, in order to get that challenge in court, you have to be a company that's willing to sue the United States because you have dipped out because Trump is lining his own pockets with his own company. So it would take something like another conference center to sue the United States, and they would win that. But then that conference center or that company would be, in the crosshairs for the entire GOP and Trump. So no one's going to do that. But this is breaking the emoluments clause. Like, Trump is just a freaking grifter. So everything is about making money. And he did this in Trump 1.0, and we pointed it out then. Like, I was writing articles on this then, where Donald Trump would have these meetings in Trump Tower with international delegations, and he would be putting them up, or in Mar-a-Lago. So it would be while he was president. So he'd be putting them up in his hotels, and he'd be charging them like 3 times the normal rate that you would otherwise charge someone to stay. And then the entire security services would have to be staying in his hotel. And he has a delegate, he has international meetings. He's making money off having international meetings. Literally, that happened right throughout Trump 1.0. Everyone knew about it, but no one did anything about it. And it's happening in Trump 2.0 as well. Like, I keep talking about, like, even if you're a fan of Trump, like, please deal with the data. Like, if Obama did this, what would you think? How would you be reacting? And it's just one rule for them and another rule for everyone else. This is absolutely disgraceful. This is corruption. End of. Right. So just a weird one here. I told you the other day about slightly different. Sorry. So we've heard that the Department of Defense is being turned into the Department of War. Trump said this the other day, which is weird.
Thank you very much. Very well stated. And really, it has to do with winning. We should have won every war. We could have won every war, but we really chose to be very politically correct or wokey. And
so we could have won every war, but we chose to be politically correct or wokey. So the Vietnam War was lost by the Americans. Like, whatever you think about that, let's assume, it was lost by the Americans. And it was lost because in the 1970s, the late 60s and early 70s, the American military was too woke. Like, what are you talking about? That when you went into Afghanistan, the reason why Afghanistan was a failure was because you were woke. Like, do you really think that? I mean, this is like the insanity of the anti-woke movement now is just blows my mind. Like, you can have whatever view about woke you like. Or what I've consistently said is, if you're worried about woke, you've been distracted. And they're saying, oh, look at all this. Look at transgender toilets. Like, how many times have any of us had any interaction with transgenders and toilets? And how important is that in our actual daily lives? And it's not. No offense to transgender and the plight of transgender people. But it's kind of internationally, certainly, but geopolitically, even domestically, politically, unimportant. Like, when you are voting in a general election, if you're voting over transgender toilets, you have been sold a lie, or you have been distracted to the point of ridiculousness. If you're not voting on what's happening to the healthcare system, what's happening to the schools, I want to know that the quality of the education is going to be good enough. How are we featuring against a PISA standards and indexes and whatnot? You know, what's going on with our X, Y, and Z, right? But if you're voting for Donald Trump because of transgender toilets, like, man, the world is nuts. So it's really interesting. Like, South Park at the moment is chef's kiss and is so on point. Now, in episode 2 of the new South Park series, I think it's episode 2, maybe episode 1, it might be 1. He comes out, Cartman, sorry, comes out with a t-shirt, "Woke is dead." Just kind of riff on God is dead and this whole idea. But woke is dead is, Cartman's like, the theme is brilliant and it's spot on. So Cartman's saying, I used to be really anti-woke and everything about me was anti-woke. And now anti-woke is just everything's anti-woke. So like, woke is dead, like the end of woke. And then he's like, well, what do I do now? Who am I having to go at now? Like, because everyone's joined this bandwagon that's anti-woke. So it's not cool. And it's not, you know, I'm no longer this iconoclast. And then in the last episode, episode 4, you had the City Walk, right? Which is, and it's selling all these Labubu toys and whatnot, and he's got this poster, "Wok is dead," and playing on the same thing, which is like, you know, it's all dead. What do you do now? And I was watching an analysis yesterday on some fractures that you're starting to see in the GOP, in the magosphere, and like the, you know, someone was talking about this in, I think is it Peter Egger, David Egger, I can't remember. But he was talking about going to this conservative conference and there's a bit of an argument going on, and you start to get people fracturing because Donald Trump, and this is a really interesting point, and I hope you're still with me here. So Donald Trump is now, and anti-woke, Donald Trump has now become almost like the deep state. So the protection of Epstein and the Epstein files, but Trump is seemingly the deep state. And he's doing these cover-ups, and he's like the norm now. So if you're someone that was like into not even into conspiracy theories, but an iconoclast that was always contrarian, up against like whatever's popular and big, like, I'm against that. So if woke was starting to become this prevalent ideology that you saw in society, then you were acting against that. But as soon as anti-woke becomes this prevalent idea in society, which in America it kind of is now, like, well, okay, what am I getting angry about? And if Donald Trump has become the norm in society, then what's the next big thing? What can I get behind? And so some people are saying you're starting to see a fracture in some of the MAGA spheres and Republican spheres of like, Donald Trump is now the norm. And he was previously Trump 1.0. So it's exciting. He's a non-politician. But now Trump 2.0, he's a politician that's covering up rich and powerful people. You know, some of these policies aren't actually cool. They're not looking up, you know, actually, like, what's the next thing? And Trump isn't going to last forever. What's the next thing? So, you know, woke is dead. Now what? Trump is normal. Now what? And that's a really interesting concept for me. So I'm interested to see where that is going to go. Hopefully that made sense to you. But anyway, that's just my tuppence on that. But to say that that, you know, the wars that America have lost by Trump's own admission, they'd lost these wars, was because they were too politically correct or wokey, is just bizarre. And as this source says, in an unbelievable moment, Trump disrespects the soldiers who fought and died in wars like Korea and Vietnam, which he avoided, saying we lost because we're too politically correct or wokey. Veterans and their families should be furious. And of course, like, he avoided draft 5 times, was it? And yeah, just really, really bizarre there. So this is one that's slightly out of out of position here. So Trump says the US will host G20, which I talked about earlier. I would very much like Xi Jinping and Putin to attend next year's G20. They would. Oh no, this is in the correct place actually. So I'm going back to this. They would. It's the last one. It wasn't. They would be observers, though I'm not sure they would want that. Okay. So you've got Trump wanting to go out of his way to be nice to dictators. So he's kind of anti-woke and, anti this and anti that, but he appears to be pro-dictator. And he wants Xi Jinping and Putin to come to next year's G20 in his own hotel, right? In his own club. And then there's this. This is such an erudite point from Republicans against Trump, which is Donald Trump on the Belarus dictator, Alexander Lukashenko. So first of all, what does Trump say?
John Cole is amazing. It was amazing a few weeks ago. Very little written about it, but there should have been. But it was a very nice gesture. The head of Belarus, who's a very respected man, strong person, strong leader. He released 16 hostages. John Cole, a lawyer who works for me, great lawyer actually, is amazing.
So his words were, head of Belarus, a very respected man, strong person, strong leader. This question is so on point. It's a pithy statement question, but it says everything about Trump. Has Trump ever met a dictator he didn't like? Honestly, answer that question. He's met Kim Jong-un and says wonderful things and said that love letter. Do you remember the letter he got from Kim Jong-un, Trump 1.0? It's like, oh, Kim Jong-un, great person, blah, 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 blah. He's shot who did he shoot? His uncle with an anti-aircraft gun on an airfield? Literally took his uncle or whatever relative it was. He didn't like him, done something wrong, and got an anti-aircraft gun and himself and blew him to bits. That's Kim Jong-un. Vladimir Putin, that he's always waxing lyrical about, saying how wonderful his relationship. He's killed political opponents like Alexei Navalny. Is responsible for 160,000 war crimes that have been documented in Ukraine. Is up for the International Criminal Court with an arrest warrant on his head for the deportation of children. And he says lovely things. Jair Bolsonaro, Viktor Orban, these kind of authoritarians. But the worst dictators in the world, in my opinion, are Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un. And he says lovely things about them. Is there not a dictator? I mean, is there any dictator that he hasn't obsequiously fawned over? Just blows my mind. And then talking about Kim Jong-un and North Korea. So I reported this fascinating story. Trump 1.0, he authorized a team to go into North Korean waters to plant a listening device. And the covert mission went south. And it turns out that they came across a fishing vessel and they basically killed all the fishermen on board this fishing vessel. They had to wipe out everyone. And it's just come out in the New York Times, and it was all green lighted by Trump. And he's then questioned on this incident.
Some new reporting on North Korea and this Navy SEAL incident in 2019. Can you say if the administration has engaged with North Korea on that incident since it happened recently? Yeah. And then can you share some records?
I don't know anything about it, no. I could look, but I know nothing about it.
Can you confirm that it happened?
I don't know anything about it. I'm hearing it now for the first time.
Okay, great. And then some.
Okay, great, says the reporter. Now, you've got two options here. He's either lying or he's not. If he's lying, then that's a problem. And he does know about it. And if he's not lying, he doesn't know stuff or he's forgetting stuff. So we have heard, and I've talked about this ad infinitum, and I do apologize, I'm going to return to it, about his general kind of ignorance. Now, if we believe what he says here, and kind of prima facie you should do, like if you're a supporter of Trump or, anyone, we should, but then he lies, of course, all the time. But, if you think he's your man, then you'd hope that he's going to be telling the truth when he's asked a direct question. If he doesn't know anything about this, and this is the first time he's heard of it, then there's a real disconnect going on in the Trump administration, and maybe it goes back to Trump 1.0. He keeps answering in press conferences and gaggles that he doesn't know anything that the person is talking about. This is the first I've heard of it. We've heard that answer now something like at least 10 times in the last few months where he's approached about something. He says, oh, I didn't know about that. Where do you hear about that? Or I didn't know, or no, I don't know anything about this. If he's telling the truth, the man is completely unbriefed. Now, we also know he's not getting intelligence briefings, so that fits with not getting intelligence briefings. But the other option is he's lying and he does know about it, in which case he's a serial liar. Neither option is good here. But there you go. Now, we are going to now go to certainly one of my best friends. I can't wait to go down a pub with him again. JD Vance. So got a lot of time for JD Vance, as you can tell already. This is what JD Vance just said in an interview, softball interview with one of the Trumps. That's what you do when you're Fox News. You just employ Trumps to work for you.
That's right. Well, in ways big and small, actually. It would not have shocked me if I had learned after knowing him that your father-in-law had been in the Marine Corps, because, and of course he didn't serve in the Marines, but he has a very Marine Corps style of leadership where he's very willing to delegate and he trusts certain people. And when he trusts those people, he's willing to give them a task and say, go and do it, come back to me and report in a week. Whether you're a Lance Corporal or you're the Commandant of the Marine Corps, everybody has a few people that report to them. Everybody has a critical task that they have to do. And everybody is a critical part of that chain that connects us from the lowest of the low to the highest of the high. That's right. Well,
just a really interesting metaphor there, because Trump dodged the draft 5 times. And Amy McGrath, who is a veteran and was in the Marines, said, okay, I was in the Marine Corps 4 times longer than JD Vance. Because JD Vance was in the Marine Corps, but he was in the press department. So I think he went to Iraq, didn't he, and just wrote press reports, and then for 6 months, and then came back. So he gets ridiculed for like leaning on the kind of veteran thing. But anyway, so McGrath says, I can tell you that Trump's style of leadership is 100% the opposite of everything actual leaders of Marines stand for. But what gets me more is it like, how do you get to a point where Fox News is this big news company has Lara Trump interviewing the vice president? Like, that's not a conflict of interest. How can this be anything other than propaganda? It's absolutely mind-blowing. But there you go. And talking about Trump and his connection to the military. So I don't know if you know, but Tom Hanks is now a historian, sort of an amateur historian, I guess you'd call him. But kind of actually more for he does some serious history work, I think. But he's also been an advocate for veterans and all sorts of stuff. But we also know that Tom Hanks isn't the biggest fan of Donald Trump. Now, the West Point Alumni Association has just cancelled the award ceremony for longtime veterans advocate Tom Hanks. So he was going to receive an award from West Point after the Academy faced pressure from Trump. So Hanks endorsed Democrats last year. This kind of petty retribution, I just think, is just really, really poor form. But there you go. What do I know? Just a few more things I've got on the agenda, actually, from another video I was going to do. But this is these will be all over the shop, just bits and pieces from here and there. Now, previously, I was talking to you about Trump's 7 days of absence, where he kind of went AWOL and then disappeared and then had all those pictures, and something was wrong. This was a picture I forgot to show. But it is interesting because there was a theory that he actually got hit on the head in some golfing thing, or something happened, or he had a fall. That was one of the theories, and that could have been why he had a swollen forehead or what. Anyway, this picture actually does seem to indicate some makeup over some dark patches on his cheek and forehead. And I forgot to show you that photo previously. But anyway, there you go. What else? I said this is going to be fairly disparate stuff here. Oh yeah, this was the tech meeting.
Tim Cook, you've done,
I'll just show you some of the beginning because it was so cringeworthy.
Tim Cook, you've done an incredible job with Apple, little company called Apple.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Very, very few people have been able to do what you've done. Congratulations.
Thank you,
Please.
sir. That means a lot to me. I want to thank you for including me this evening. It's incredible to be among everyone here, particularly you and the First Lady. I've always enjoyed having dinner and interacting. I want to thank you for setting the tone such that we could make a major investment in the United States and have some key manufacturing, advanced manufacturing here. I think that says a lot about your focus and your leadership and your focus on innovation. I also want to thank you.
So on and so forth. And it goes on and on and on. And then it goes around the table. Bill Gates, to his credit, only said, thank you for your incredible leadership and for getting this wonderful table of people together. And then he stopped. And then that's it. But, you know, it was just really cringeworthy stuff, I have to say. Not a big fan of seeing stuff like that, and was very similar to the cabinet meeting. Now, I've already done another video for you on JD Vance responding to the destruction of Venezuelan boat. And we've got also a comment on that from Pete Hegseth, who's the Secretary of Defense.
Mr. Secretary, what legal authority did the Pentagon invoke to strike that boat full of drug smugglers?
We have the absolute and complete authority to conduct that. First of all, just the defense of the American people alone. 100,000 Americans were killed each year under the previous administration because of an open border and open drug traffic flow.
Was there
that is an assault on the American people. I said we smoked a drug boat, and there's 11 narco terrorists at the bottom of the ocean. And when other people try to do that, they're going to meet the same fate.
Mr. Secretary,
so what's really interesting there is he's calling them narco terrorists, and he's talking about a war on. So I guess they know that they don't have the legal standpoint to have done that. So what they're trying to do is make it look like it is actually war. And if you have declared war on these drug runners, then you've got the permission to blow up the boats or something like that. But anyway, that's the route that I think Hegseth has taken there. Just seeing what other things I'll do two more little things. We're going to go to this one first. Just the state of politics at the moment is pretty incredible. This is from Tommy Tuberville, who I'm not a fan of, but this is what Tuberville, as a senator from Alabama, says.
It all goes back to one thing. President Trump's a leader. Those people in Chicago, they're either corrupt, mentally ill, or stupid of what they're doing, and President Trump is going to.
So Tuberville says on national television, the people in Chicago are either corrupt, mentally ill, or stupid. And as Hemant Mehta here says, I've interviewed him a few times. I've edited a chapter with a book with a chapter of his. If a Democrat ever said this about people in Alabama, it would get non-stop coverage on Fox. So if, I don't know, J.B. Pritzker came out and said, Alabama, people of Alabama are either corrupt, mentally ill, or stupid, Fox News would go nuts. But Tuberville can sit there and literally say people in Chicago are either corrupt, mentally ill, or stupid. Just find that absolutely outrageous. That's kind of where we're at the moment. Now, last thing I was going to talk to you about, well, I have more, but I need to go and spend some time with my missus. Governor Newsom. So he is an interesting one. He's a California governor, right? California is the fourth biggest economy in the world. So actually, he's got a pretty good, I guess, experience now of running a massive economy. And he has been fighting back against Trump in a very abrasive manner, which actually Democrats and independents are liking because his polls are now shot up. In fact, he is more popular than Donald Trump in the polls across the board. So, as in across the board, obviously Republicans are on balance going to not find him particularly attractive, but he is fighting, and the fact that he's got this fight is apparently what is driving people's driving his popularity, and that's putting him in pole position to actually be the front runner for challenging Trump challenging the GOP candidate, whoever that would be, in 2029. And he's moved up precipitously. And this is the sort of thing he's doing. And actually, I really like this. And a lot of people are actually fans of this. But a lot of Republicans don't get what's going on here, or at least don't admit it openly and try and misrepresent what's going on. So what Newsom is doing here is, in all caps, taking the mickey out of Donald Trump by mimicking him in order to show how ridiculous Donald Trump is, right? In order to show that, like he says, if you think, essentially what he's saying is like, this is the logical analogy. So if you think what I'm saying is ridiculous in any way, then you should think what Donald Trump is saying is also ridiculous. So if you're a Republican that reads this and goes, oh, this is insane, or this is stupid, the way that you're saying this, then if I'm mimicking the president, then, you know, logically, you should find what they're saying as ridiculous. I, Gavin C. Newsom, brackets, the most successful governor in American history, close brackets, hereby demand that Canada gift me, quote, a big, beautiful plane I get to keep after I leave office, open brackets, if I leave. If their new prime minister, open brackets, very nice guy, but not as handsome as Trudeau, close brackets, does not send me a plane, California will impose, quote, the biggest tariffs he has ever seen, as in my God-given right, as is my God-given right. Many people are saying, quote, Governor Gavin C. Newsom deserves a best plane, even better than Air Force One. I agree. Send the big plane, Prime Minister Carney. I deserve it. Thank you, GCN. And of course, he's not asking for that plane. He's clearly taking a mickey. But they don't seem to get it. So you've had Fox News saying, oh, he's mimicking, this is juvenile, this is ridiculous, what he's saying is stupid. But that's the point. Yes, it's juvenile. He's using the same text as someone else who you should also call juvenile. He's mimicking it. So any criticism you have against Gavin Newsom should be criticism against Trump. But even JD Vance doesn't get
You
this.
bring up humor. Gavin Newsom sure thinks he's a comedian these days on social media, and so does much of the left. His polling numbers have gone way up since he started mimicking President Trump on social media.
Yeah.
What do you make of Governor Newsom?
I make of Governor Newsom that you said he's mimicking Donald Trump, and I think that's exactly right. The lesson of Donald Trump, the lesson of President Trump in American politics is you've got to be authentic to yourself. And when I see Gavin Newsom trying to act like Donald Trump,
he's not trying to act like Donald Trump to be Donald Trump. He's acting like the mimicry is to take the piss out of Donald Trump. If you don't get that, or you're just purposefully like maligning Newsom here by purposefully not understanding, or you just don't understand because you're stupid.
That's the opposite of authenticity. He's not trying to be Gavin Newsom, whoever that is. He's trying to be a fake carbon copy of Donald Trump, and it just doesn't work. You can't mimic the king. You can't mimic the master. You ought to just go.
He's not trying to actually be the carbon copy. He's not trying to get elected because you look at what he's saying that's really sensible. Oh, that's good. The whole thing is a joke, and the joke is on Trump, and you don't get it, you gargantuan moldy toenail.
Go and be yourself, and I think that the American people would like that a lot more than a cheap imitation of the President of the United States.
It's not a cheap imitation. Honestly, just blows my mind that you don't know what's going on here. I said that's going to be the last thing. Right, apparently Congress has placed Wikimedia, and I looked into this, and this is true, under federal investigation for including criticism of Israel in Wikipedia pages, requesting information on individuals who contributed. And I was listening to, on BBC News this morning when I woke up, I was listening to Mike Huckabee, who's the ambassador to Israel, and I've never heard such a plethora of lies and misinterpretations of reality as Mike Huckabee in that interview with Laura Kunsberg on BBC. It was horrific. It was essentially appeasing genocide or ignoring or reinterpreting all the data in horrific ways. Yeah. Okay, final thing. Trump is demanding that ABC News pay him more money and fire commentators for saying that he disagrees with, for saying things he disagrees with. This is what happens when you bend the knee to Trump. He doesn't stop. He will shake you down. This is why all institutions need to stand firm and not give it an inch. So Trump has said, why does fake news ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos have low IQ commentator Donna Brazile on the show? Wasn't she totally discredited when she gave crooked Hillary Clinton the questions to a debate? Wasn't she fired by fake news CNN for doing so? Why would ABC News hire such a dumb retread? Check out her disastrous interview with Megyn Kelly from years ago. Total classic. Donna is dumb as a rock and a liar besides. He's so unprofessional. She and sloppy Chris Christie should be fired from a highly discredited ABC fake news. They just paid me $16 million for inaccurate reporting. Don't get me started on that. Now they should pay me more. Thank you for your attention for this matter. He's just he is shaking. Oh, it's just okay. Final. Joe Walsh says, pay attention to this. Miles Taylor the other day, who used to work in Trump 1.0 for Trump. Trump installs a SAR at the DHS, the Department for Homeland Security, to oversee U.S. election integrity. It's not just gerrymandering, folks. The White House is gearing up to use broader federal powers to shape the 2026 election in its favor. Let me be blunt. DSA-AHS was created after 9/11 to protect the country and not rig its elections, but I worry that's what the president is trying to do. So just be really careful. We'll have to keep an eye on election integrity going forward and whether they will be rigged and whatnot. Okay, so that is enough from me. I need to go next door. Stephen Bendal, thank you so much. I think we're going to have to. I think we're going to have more Taco. This is on Trump putting sanctions on Russia. Will he chicken out? Hopefully not, but Taco has been served regularly. So, yeah. And thank you for your support, Stephen. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know. I hope he's going to come through. Kevin Force, thank you for your ATP Geopolitics memberships. You are a legend. And Julian Roster, 10 of those are even more legendary. So thank you very much to both of you two. It really is super, super generous. I need to do more for my members, and I do apologize for not doing so. Johnny Nevergard with some Norwegian love. Really appreciate that and your continued support. And then we have Rick from the Netherlands saying, hi, Jonathan. Poland got hit by another Shahid last night. Do you think Poland and NATO should more actively defend its air and send a message to Putin by joining a coalition of the willing? Yes. I mean, they are in a coalition of the willing. As far as I understand, they're just not going to send troops. But I think they should definitely shoot down Russian stuff in over their airspaces. And I actually think they should be more ballsy, the coalition, and actually start putting a no-fly zone over Western Ukraine and help out more formally like that. Michael Vuchar, grumble, JP, wait until after the fourth plenum. This is China. I cannot stress this enough. Please have patience. It's 3 weeks away. We're going to see what happens with Chinese politics when they have this big sort of plenum, the meeting, the party over there, and we'll see how Xi Jinping comes out looking at that. Caught a live one, says Lee Rents. Thanks so much, Lee. Cheers, JP. Cheers to you, more likely. Zeb Carter gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thanks, mate. Appreciate that. And penultimately, we have Putin puppet saying attack tactics on purpose to destroy the US and democracies from the inside while enforcing and uniting the adversary and dictators on the outside. Yeah, like everything, like I've said so many times, what the Trump administration does so often appears to be functionally identical to if you imagine the Trump administration was actually a bunch of Russian agents. Like literally, that's what I expect to happen if you had a Russian plant dictating things in the Trump White House. Joe Hales, and thank you. Joe Hales is really, really generous. Thanks, mate. Really think Russia are getting desperate with all these mass drone attacks. Looking forward to a hopeful economic collapse. Yeah, so like I'm up and down. Like last night was bad because that's 810 drones. So they are able to build that many and stockpile them. Now they've had fewer sent over the last sort of week, but well, they had fewer sent in that period that I keep talking about where it looks like the Ukrainians had an effect on their manufacturing, but that seems to be back now and operating at the levels that they would want and going forward. So we really could expect nights of 1,000 drones, and that's just too much for air defense. So it's really incumbent upon the Ukrainians to be striking at the manufacturing facilities. I'm sure they're working on that. It's just very difficult because they are huge and they will be fairly well defended and they're very far away. So Yelabuga particularly. So yeah, Are the Russians getting desperate? I think there are so many signs showing that they're not in a good place economically and in terms of huge forces. I don't think they have huge forces, but then I don't think the Ukrainians have huge forces. So it's like I keep saying, it's attrition chicken. Who is going to capitulate first? Which side will be attriting the other side at a more beneficial ratio? But there are some good signs for Ukraine, and there's some bad signs for Russia. But you can also reverse that too, and you know, things are tough for both sides in different contexts. Thank you, David Edwards, for a super chat. Really appreciate that, David. Thank you for your kindness. So thank you, everyone. Really, I need to go and spend. I'm sure my missus is, going to be angry with me for my existence. Maybe she's happy with that. Who knows? Thank you to everyone. I really appreciate you. And please go to Car for Ukraine. I think Ivan was working on the link that was a little bit broken earlier today. Please go to car4ukraine.com, car for the number 4, car4ukraine.com, campaigns, click on the campaigns, click on Autumn Harvest, and then go to the ATP Geopolitics. Make sure you do that. That's in the live chat. I'll try and make sure it's in the description as well. Thank you for all of your support. I really do appreciate you. Have a good day, and I'll be with you again tomorrow for normal service. Will be resumed pretty normal today. Hey ho. Take care. Toodle pips.